We have a special guest here in just a few moments. Let's see. Okay, it's en route. So one of the things in putting this conference together was thinking about big ideas. And as you saw with IDEO talking about housing, education, there's a lot of big ideas that can come out of Aspen and change the world. And I've always believed that. When you're in the mountains, you think bigger. Now, part of this inaugural Aspen Design Conference, we also wanted to talk about some of the issues closer to home. And one of the issues that's plagued Aspen for decades and continues to is the traffic. And this is a problem, I like to say it's intractable. People argue, we talk about the bridge, we talk about incredible opportunities for designing a future entrance. And this is something that's been fought about for ages. It's also an issue with all the people who live down valley and the tradesmen who work here. They have to sit in traffic for an hour and a half each way. And any of you who try to leave at 5 o'clock, you know how painful that can be. So we're very honored today to have Gary Lauder speak on this problem. Gary's the director of Lauder Partners out of Silicon Valley. Now, he has a very interesting history where he's invested in 170 technology companies, been very successful. He co-created the Socrates Circle at Aspen Institute. He's a pillar of this community. Well, he also was the chair of the Transportation Committee in Atherton. And I've had California, it's near Silicon Valley. So every once in a while, Gary and I cross paths, and we always end up talking about big ideas, whether it's the airport or traffic. And he's got some really good ideas about what some potential solutions can be. And it's really a design problem. And how do we use design thinking to solve this problem? So without further ado, Gary Lauder.
Thank you, DJ. Thank you, and I'm honored to be here. So in the interest of time, I'm going to try to talk fast, since most people can absorb materials faster than people normally speak, and that'll let me cover more ground in the time allotted. And I will tend to rely on the Doppler effect, which is the tendency of stupid ideas to seem smarter when they come at you rapidly. I've had a lifelong fascination with the question of, since we have solved most of society's problems, why have we not solved the problem of traffic congestion? It turns out to be an intent problem, in my opinion. I have no credentials to fall back on. All I can offer is reason, logic, and some evidence. So not everybody reads the kind of thing that I do. I bought this book in the 1990s, a toolbox for alleviating traffic congestion. I'll spare you the others, but it's not normal, I know. And I've given a few TED Talks all on traffic issues, all design related, and not what you think of with the word design, but it all is fundamental. Design is fundamental to it. So raise your hand if you live in Aspen or Roaring Fork Valley. Okay, it is. Okay, great. And who is not from around here? Okay, a couple. And raise my hand if you believe in psychokinesis. Okay. For the benefit of non-locals, I'll explain some of the local stuff. And for the benefit of humanity, this is not just about Aspen. So my personal journey, forgive the double entendres, is that originally I'm from New York City. I used to bike to school, then college to class, and then once working in New York City, I biked to work, and I loved it. And then I attended a biker event in which there was an effort to ban cars in Manhattan, which is interesting. And that was, to me, evidence of former Justice Stephen Breyer's mother's saying, which is, there's no point of view so unusual that there isn't someone in the United States who doesn't hold it. And in the 1980s, I encountered a parking lot named the Montauk Highway, which was the only way to get to the Hamptons in Long Island, New York, which is where a lot of people went for the weekend. And without traffic, it was about 2 hours. And on Friday and Sunday afternoons and evenings, it was 4 hours. Then I asked someone, so why don't you improve the traffic by adding a lane? And the answer was, well, that would bring more New Yorkers. And I said, what's wrong with that? And the answer is, they would cause more traffic. So in order to prevent traffic, you keep traffic worse. Interesting. And this was some of their anti-expansion material. And the New Yorkers came anyway. Sound familiar? I call this Mobius logic. This is a Mobius strip. And it's logic that is both circular and twisted. It resembles infinity, which is like the time wastage, and it's also a one-sided object, and which is similar to the failure to consider the other side's arguments, which is a consequence of absence or in-depth debate, which is true here as well. Which brings us to Aspen. The entrance to Aspen is a single lane, and it causes the backup shown here. This is typically about a 20-minute delay into town in the eastbound in the morning, and similar on the way out. It backs all the way up to the airport. And it clogs in the afternoon. It clogs Main Street and the West End. And unlike many other places, this is a multi-hour peak. So it's not just during the normal commuting hours. And this, for example, the diagram shows 10 a.m. on a Monday. So this problem is about 60 years old. It wasn't as bad long ago, but the debate over how to solve the entrance has been going on for that amount of time. And it's worsened as the population has grown. Aspen residents who worked locally have been displaced by wealthier people. In other words, the servers have been replaced by the served, which forces more people to commute into town. And yet Aspen leadership has chosen to not add another lane, and that's despite a February 1990 referendum that voted in favor of 4-lane into town. And there have been many subsequent votes with complex questions, which makes those outcomes harder to interpret. But anyway, the suffering drivers seem not to be enough to get Aspen to move on this. So it took over 100 deaths in the Lahaina fire in Maui due to the traffic congestion escaping to get, and Aspen's evacuation times estimated over 10 hours. I've seen one estimate of 17 hours. So that was a motivator, and so we need more lanes out of town. And then another is at the Castle Creek Bridge, which carries Highway 82 at the entrance to Aspen. That's reaching its end of life and almost failed the inspection to keep fully using. If it had failed, then they would have had to have limited the weight going across it, which would have backed things up even more. So the city council decided to do something, and that they had partially evaluated a few alternatives, and rather than determine the optimal configuration to fix the traffic problem, they dusted off the 1998 Record of Decision, or the ROD, which chose the preferred alternative because that was the only alternative that had a few of the many approvals. It's a really bad design, a really, really bad design. So the question is then what alternatives to prefer. The Record of Decision evaluated several road design alternatives, not the 40 plus that some people claim that it did. And the finalists they called the preferred alternative, and it's a 4-lane across the Maralt open space to a new bridge that lines up with Main Street. 2 of those lanes would be dedicated to public transit, so there would still only be 1 lane in each direction for general traffic. And Cemetery Lane, under the preferred alternative, would be disconnected from the roundabout. It would only connect across the Castle Creek Bridge to a new light that would be put in at 7th and Main. How did this become preferred? The design intent behind the preferred alternative was the program's, and I quote, "This program is designed to help achieve the city and community goal of maintaining 1993 traffic volumes in the year 2015. Okay. And until recently, people were claiming that was happening, but that was because they weren't measuring all the traffic coming via Power Plant Road. And then why limit the number of cars, you may ask? What it said, and the first answer was, though the highway system will operate under congestion, this congestion is considered part of the disincentive for single occupancy vehicle travel and will increase transit usage. So the goal was to create a traffic jam in order to make people take the bus. Okay, they've accomplished that goal, although that's for the preferred alternative, which hasn't been built yet. And then the answer number 2 is, quote, focused on limiting vehicle trips into Aspen to create a less congested downtown core. So the presumption is with greater congestion, fewer people will come downtown. Okay. And it's also congesting Main Street and the West End in the afternoon, and obviously 82 in the morning, and that's part of the price paid. But at least we have a less congested downtown core, although that's a questionable assumption because the people tend to come anyway. And as with the Montauk Highway, they came anyway. 15 years ago, I gave a 5-minute TED Talk in Long Beach where I analyzed the microeconomics of a single intersection. I was amazed that the cost of 2 stop signs on people's time and on gas, not counting the queues forming because of the stop signs, was $2 million. And then I began to calculate the enormous cost to society of many different types of delays, traffic and otherwise. And the time that things take are a given, but they should not be taken or accepted as is. And if mortals created it, mortals can change it, and we should not be habituated to it. That's the way it is. It usually doesn't have to be. So the solutions usually have already been proven elsewhere. So the problem is usually that decision makers don't feel your pain, and the political representation often doesn't match affected parties. And that's the case here in Aspen, where most of the affected people are not actually voters in town. And the voters should have, I think, a lot of more empathy. So the cost of the entrance to Aspen, time is money, and it's similar to the interchangeability of energy and mass in Einstein's E equals mc squared equation. And the interchangeability here is $34 an hour. So you multiply that by the average delay, about 20 minutes each way, for about 11,000 cars per day each way, and that's about $73 million a year in people's time. And the present value of that annual cost at a 5% discount rate is about $1.5 billion is the cost that is represented by all that delay. And that's not counting the cost of gas and the pollution and so forth. So again, the City Council doesn't really represent the parties that are affected here. It's like a tax, only worse. Taxes go to pay for something. This is just value destruction. And it's not just money. If you take Aspen's 2 million plus person hours per year wasted, and you divide that by 16 waking hours per day, assuming that we live for that time and not sleeping time, and divide that by number of days in the year, and that's 356 person years wasted per year, divided by the average life expectancy of 78, and that's about 4.7 lives wasted per year. Now, if 4 people died each year because of the city council's indecision, there might have been a different outcome or a different city council, but that's not the case. Anyway, this is not a new concept. This is a quotation from Ben Franklin. "Dost thou love life? Then do not squander time, for that is the stuff life is made of." And another by Thoreau, "The price of anything is the amount of life you exchange for it." Now, why choose a design to keep traffic congestion, you might wonder? The answer is due to the belief in induced traffic, or also called induced demand. I'll abbreviate by ID. And that's the idea that less traffic jam induces more people to drive. It's true, it does, but not to the extent believed by most. Most believe that 2 times the number of lanes means 2 times the number of trips. In other words, 100% elasticity. The RAND organization did a meta-analysis and found that it's actually about 20% elasticity. In other words, you get maybe 20% more people taking those trips. This misconception is why we have growing congestion, not just in Aspen, but everywhere in the world. Governments have abandoned their duty to accommodate growth because of the belief in this mistaken idea. And this is an example of highway construction expenditures using 1990 dollars. And this shows that they peaked in the mid-60s and have dramatically down since then, and it's even lower. And this graph ends in 1989, but I've tried to find current data, and it's very low. And we also stopped building bridges and tunnels and so forth, and that we lost the will to build more roads because of this belief in induced demand. So why is it so mainstream? Well, there are many reasons. Partly misattribution, meaning shifting from other routes to a new, faster one, creates the appearance of new trips when really they're not, just shifted. And more real estate development coincides with it. It also induces construction. If they know that a new highway is opening up, often they build things to take advantage of that. And more real estate development generates more trips. So there's the Latin phrase, post hoc ergo propter hoc, which translates to after this, therefore because of this. And here is an example from my favorite religion, Pastafarianism, from the Church of the Flying Spaghetti Monster. This is the correlation between the global average temperature compared to the number of pirates in the world. And as you can see, there's an inverse correlation. So is that causation? Anyway, so if you believe in induced demand, then if less congestion induces more driving, then more congestion should induce less driving. And we have a lot more congestion and a lot more driving, so it can't be 100% elasticity. If the mechanism of action is the unpleasantness of the traffic jam, then self-driving cars are going to make delays less annoying, and therefore people will binge watch or do email while they drive, And so you'll expect more people to drive and more congestion. So another reason to abandon the notion of induced demand as a excuse not to build roads. Therefore what? There are many things that we rely on government for. Building roads is one. If we allow development, it's dysfunctional not to build more roads to accommodate that. But that doesn't mean that they should remain free. In economics, there are three ways to allocate a scarce resource: price, lottery, and queuing, which is waiting in line. And since the price equals zero for roads around here, then you have too much demand, and so you have queuing, and so you have jams. So I recommend both adding one or more lanes and charge for single occupancy vehicles. Is there any alternative? There are several better road designs that were not evaluated by the ROD, and my favorite is the modified split shot or improved split shot. When the city did a survey of Aspenites last fall, the diagram that they provided associated with this was wrong and unclear, and so that was useless. And actually, before launching into that, the key question is, what should the design intent be for here? And the answer is, in my opinion, safety first. So we should maximize the speed of egress in the event of a wildfire. We should minimize road accidents and their severity. And traffic lights have way worse severity of many more fatalities and severe injuries because of the tendency for T-bones and head-on collisions compared to, for example, roundabouts or non-intersections where traffic continuously flows. And we should solve for the problem for emergency vehicles and minimize everyone's stress level, because cortisol, the stress hormone, is unhealthy. And we should also try to decongest, so supply and demand should be in equilibrium. That means increasing the supply of road, in other words, adding one general traffic lane, and ideally add a bus lane too. So we should also manage demand. Now, you try to reduce it by charging using RFID for an automated charge for non-residents in single occupancy vehicles. And that would provide revenues to pay for roads and public transit. And we could facilitate ride sharing, and there are too many others to mention here, but demand management alone is insufficient. That's an important idea. There are also environmental objectives. We want to minimize harm. Greenhouse gases and pollutants are worse from idling traffic. Electric vehicles are making that better, but it's partly a function of the energy source that people use to charge the vehicles. And we want to preserve Aspen's town character. Actually, I advocate restoring that town character by eliminating the jams that really are horrible for the town. So also, we want to, for the rural open space, we want to preserve as much as is reasonable, which is not the same as much as possible. So one question is, why do we love Muralt open space more than all the other open spaces? And the answer is because we see it, which you wouldn't if you built a tunnel under it, which many are talking about for the entrance to Aspen. In 1996, the Colorado Department of Transportation traded the 39-acre Mills Ranch at the confluence of the Roaring Fork and Brush Creek rivers in return for 8.6 acres of right-of-way through the open space between Buttermilk to the eastern bank of Castle Creek for the new roads. So 29 years ago would have been the best time to protest it. A little more history about that. Half of the Muralt open space was the Thomas property, and that was purchased with transportation funds for transportation purposes. So most of Muralt would be preserved. A new road would only take about 4 to 5 acres, which is about 4 to 5% of it, leaving 95 to 96% of it preserved. And it's interesting to note where the Friends of Muralt originated. You see this red dot on the map, that's 217 Harbor Lane. That is a home that's adjacent to Castle Creek, which is near where the new bridge would be, which is a textbook definition of NIMBY. And there's nothing wrong with that, but people shouldn't pretend it's all about preserving Muralt as opposed to trying to keep a road away from their home. Anyway, many people believe anything but more road. Aspen has talked about everything but that. We talk about light rail, gondola, myriad traffic management techniques, and they help on the margin, but the need for more lanes is now inescapable. Aspen is during a wildfire. This anything but road approach is this scene from
Scott! I want you to meet Daddy's nemesis, Austin Powers.
What are you feeding him? Why don't you just kill him?
No, Scott, I have an even better idea. I'm going to place him in an easily escapable situation involving an overly elaborate and exotic death.
Why don't you just shoot him now? I'll go get a gun. We'll shoot him together. It'll be fun. Bang! Dead. Done.
One more peep out of you and you are grounded, mister, and I am not joking. All right, let's begin.
So, in other words, trying everything but the obvious solution. So, anyway, can we design something better? I think so. As foreshadowed earlier, called the modified improved split shot, and this is the simple version of it. Basically, the orange is the existing roads, and the idea is you add a new road across Meralt with a new bridge over the Castle Creek that lines up with Main Street, and it would have 2 or 3 lanes, 2 lanes of general traffic, and optionally a 1 lane dedicated for buses or HOVs and/or HOVs. And the same on the outbound. Note that the traffic light at Cemetery Lane would be eliminated because there would be no need for it because it'd just be right turns there. And under this scenario, there's no light added at 7th and Main, and so traffic could flow continuously and smoothly without obstruction. So in this case, you can see the green road is shifted a little bit to the north to keep the open space more open. And unlike some of the other diagrams, the new road is separated from the original to allow snow removal to both sides. Since if you have 2 or 3 lanes, it's really tricky to remove the snow from the lane all the way on the left to get it all the way off the road on the right. So by having a separation, then that's easier. And also there's this little turnaround added just before the roundabout to enable people coming from Cemetery Lane to turn around to go head eastbound into town before getting to the roundabout. When Jacobs Engineering evaluated the split shot, they rated it poorly in terms of improving traffic because all that traffic coming from Cemetery Lane headed into town would have to go through the roundabout, which slowed everyone through the roundabout. And so by doing that, you solve that problem. And then now, optionally, there could also be an underpass for Cemetery Lane traffic to get straight into town, which would eliminate the need for that turnaround. It's more expensive, but it's arguably more functional. And then if you did that, then you'd probably want to add that little green road in there, and that would enable people coming from the west end to hop onto 82 eastbound to get into town, because that would be easier than trying to turn left onto Main Street, especially since traffic would be continuously flowing on Main Street. And this diagram shows the shaded blue area are the areas of the people who would likely want to use that to get into town that way, and this is another view of that. So some of the key attributes for the preferred alternative: this eliminates all traffic lights. As I said, it's much, much safer. It actually solves the entrance to Aspen traffic congestion problem. It does not screw the Cemetery Lane and McLean Flat Road drivers. And a new bridge would have only 2 or 3 lanes into Main Street, no eminent domain is needed, and the burger cabin could stay and so forth. The construction phasing would be the fastest alternative, meaning, so first you build the new bridge and the road to connect to that, then you redirect all traffic over that, and since if it only has 3 lanes, you'd have the middle lane alternate between the morning and evening, so 2 lanes in the morning, 2 lanes out in the afternoon. And then you rebuild the Castle Creek Bridge, and then once that's done, then you make it conform to what I just showed you. And you might be able to amend the preferred alternative later on to do this, since it's actually a minor difference in the roadway. And that difference is mainly in keeping the Cemetery Lane connection to the roundabout, that what's circled here. How do we get from here to there? So another design goal is the speed of approvals. The council's decision to pursue the preferred alternative was mainly motivated by that, which was short-sighted but could be amended to make these changes. And keep the connector between Cemetery Lane and the roundabout, add the little turnaround that I showed, and the underpass is a bigger deal, but it's probably warranted. I think the council should run simulations of the reasonable alternatives to figure out how good they each are, and create a process to engage in more public debate. And by debate where people challenge each other. There is a newish entity that is having discussions. It's called the Transportation Coalition for the 21st Century, which is a quasi-governmental discussion group, which is not equal to a forum for debate. It's more groupthink, and it's not really open to contradictory points of views. And for example, induced demand is one of their shibboleths. And here is an example of one of their favorite consultants. This photograph comes from the Aspen Daily News, showing this consultant presenting to this group. And what you can see here on this slide is he's saying keeping up with demand by adding roadway capacity is unsustainable, which is a reminder of committees. I'm going to bastardize this quotation, but committees are composed of individuals who individually can do nothing, but the committee can collectively come together to decide that nothing can be done. So we need more debate. And I was in an airport yesterday and the bookstore, and this was one of the books that I found on the shelf. I welcome any of you to call BS on me, and more importantly, on your leaders. And another book that I saw yesterday was this one. I don't even vote here. Actually, it's up to the rest of you. My time's up, but now that you're all Rhodes Scholars, it's up to you. And remember, time is a great teacher, but unfortunately, it kills all its pupils. So thank you for your time and attention.
But Gary, I feel like all of this just leads to double the amount of cars in town, more people, more problems, more things. How do we handle that? What's the infrastructure look like? And how do we move forward when town is just a lot more busy?
Eli, glad you asked. You can actually have double the number of cars arriving per hour, but that's not double the number of cars per day. And so, as I said, in the absence of traffic jam, you could expect some more trips, maybe 20%, but the additional inflow, so I don't think it would create a traffic jam on Main Street because since Main Street has so many paths off of it for people to get to their destinations, that traffic would percolate out to the sides for people to get to where they're wanting to go. So I think it'd be that it could easily handle that. Main Street, after all, is 6 or 7 lanes wide, so there's no real bottleneck there. There is 20% more cars is not a big deal if that were the number, but one thing that makes a lot of sense to a lot of people is the idea of building an underground parking garage underneath Wagner Park or Pepke Park. I think Wagner's more convenient. There was a referendum about that in the past. It failed. Don't think that was dispositive because in these referenda, it's always a matter of like how they ask the question and what are the conditions and all that. And with one of the things there was a study done in San Francisco that found that 30% of the cars driving around were cars looking for parking. So if we actually provide parking, then we'll have fewer cars driving around, and you could actually get cars off the streets. If you don't like cars, then the best way to actually get rid of the problem is to bury them in an underground parking lot. And it's so ironic that the anti-car manifestations result in our having more cars in our faces, whether in the form of traffic jams or difficulty in finding parking. And the irony is analogous to when our daughter was very young, like 4. She didn't like her bangs. And so what did she do? She decided to cut them off. Now, she didn't understand that the way to solve it is to grow them out. It's the same kind of thing. If you don't like cars, you do things to get them out of your face. So that's some of my answer to that question, and I'm open to others. Other questions, that is. So the question was, what are some of the other alternatives that people have come up with other than mine and the preferred alternative? My second favorite alternative is one that has 2 roundabouts, in other words, existing roundabout, and they put a new roundabout at Cemetery Lane. That has some of the characteristics that what my recommendation have, but roundabouts are intrinsically limited in the total capacity that they have, even if it's a 2-lane roundabout, and that concerns me. But and also if you want to, in the ideal conception of this, you have 2 lanes for general traffic and 1 lane for a bus. A 3-lane roundabout is not really a thing. having driven through L'Etoile in Paris, there it's like a 7-lane roundabout. Not everyone's up for that, but anyway, look, it's doable, but to me, it's just less optimal. And so anyway, that's second favorite. But there are a lot of other alternatives. In the recent survey that was done, so there was the modified split shot, which had a lousy diagram, unclear verbiage, and all that. And then there was another one that was on the survey that was asked about, but now I'm forgetting what it was. Does anyone else remember? Yes? Right. The people mover thing was recently discussed at the coalition meeting, but that was not part of the survey that was done last fall about alternatives. Basically, by the way, the notion of giving really incomplete and bad information to the public and saying, hey, everybody, tell us what you think, to me, representative government is for handling complex questions, and people should be asked more simpler ones. And if you want to see a good example of that, if you look at the voter pamphlet for San Francisco, it's like a phone book. You don't want to put too many questions to the public because there's a lot of homework to be done. And asking people their preferences, I think, is important. Asking people, how important is it that you have rapid egress or reduction of traffic congestion, and so forth. There was another question?
I just wanted to say one thing. After this, because actually right now, Gary will be around the corner at the Aspen Collective, and you can ask him any questions over at the gallery. So if you have questions right now, Gary will be around the corner at the Aspen Collective.
Are you cutting off, or you were the one who allowed this last?
We'll do all the questions over at the Aspen Collective. Thank you so much, Gary. Please give another round
Thank
of applause
you,
for
Eli.
Gary Lauder. Thank you, guys.